I just wondered if there was, you talked about your 4 cycles, and there seemed to be something else they relied upon as well, aside from freeing up of capital and deployment of new technology, and that was mass employment.
Yeah.
So the Industrial Revolution, the factory system,
Yeah.
48 was Taylorisation, etc. In a lot of developed economies now, and even E8 economies such as South Africa, you've got a high-end engineering manufacturing growth path, which in effect cuts out an awful lot of people which would have formerly found employment in mass production. And I just wondered how that kind of factors into the ability to recover if you don't have mass employment.
That is a brilliant question, and thank you for asking it. So you basically, if you didn't hear it, he was saying, you know, how if the growth path of developing world and advanced world economies is to choose high value, high end, high value add, high skill employment, the fact is, I'm sure some of you are able to do this. You walk into any well-tooled or well-equipped factory around here, not many people around. And they can be highly productive in that respect. So high-end, anything actually, doesn't create mass employment. Now, the fiction we've lived through a number of fictions. One then is that so everybody should go to university, or at least half the population should go to university. Well, what do you do if you can't then get a job like that? Incidentally, however, so there's 2 ends of the problem. I went to a high-end computer-aided manufacture company in the Northwest that had, I think it was 3,000 employees worldwide and 500 vacancies. They said they were ferried around in taxis by PhDs who were not good enough to work in this place, but they had 500 vacancies. So there are actually pinch points that a World War II style employment kind of strategy would, because you can sort that out. Go to this course, get better, you know, stop driving the taxi, then you can get the job. That's one thing. But of course, this doesn't solve the problem for the baristas and the cleaners and the low end, you know, without disparaging that kind of work at all, because more and more of us may have to even do it when we are in our 2nd or 3rd career, because we're also in the 2nd or 3rd career age now. The point is about that kind of employment, from a macroeconomic point of view, it's very low paid, and it's never going to be very high value. So the fiction that we can all work in low-end service jobs, I just don't think will sustain us. And here's probably the most honest thing that people will say to you. But business owners and entrepreneurs from the developing world are often very frank in what that means. Our own politicians are often very not frank in what it means. What it means is, if nothing changes, then the population of the first world is going to head to the bottom, and it will meet China and India on the way up. In some cities in the West, there is already 3rd world style poverty at the edges. I reported on it in Greece 2 weeks ago on Newsnight. You can find it in Gary, Indiana, and Detroit in America. 3rd world style poverty. But so it's not already, you can recognize sort of imported 3rd world living standards in some cities. Now, that's a tough message. And however, I think most democratic countries are not going to stand for it. This is what makes me think that people will eventually vote for policies that protect them against that global marketplace. But as soon as you're in that, you're into a post-globalization world. You're into deglobalization, and you only have to cross your fingers that the people who come forward and advocate it are sensible, liberal-minded, non-crazy people. Because there's plenty of not sensible, illiberal, crazy people who are the avatars of those ideas right now. The far right across Europe basically live for those ideas, and parts of the far left actually, Greek Communist Party, get out the euro, go back to autarky, that's what they advocate. So, you know, it's very hard to be a kind of bearer of kind of annoying and gritty news, but I think that those of us who believe it, our job is to try and warn people, to say, look, you know, that world is not far away. That world of where official politics and the official consensus breaks down is not far away, unless you can come to some conclusion that begins to, and I believe technocratically it might be possible, begins to redistribute, look at the role of work, itself. How much work do we need to do? Who does it? What remuneration? What is the social aspect as well as the private aspect? That's possible to think about that. And it sounds nutty and loony and a bit tree hugging, but actually people have been thinking about how to redistribute work for a long time. You know, some of the quite soft new left economists of the 1970s were thinking about a post-work age. So maybe you have to think about that. I know that again takes us onto the terrain of big ideas rather than small policy, but that is my answer to what you asked.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Paul, I was delighted to hear that you're following my boss on Twitter, the Archbishop. Do you think that he and other faith leaders have got anything constructive to offer, particularly in the kind of human dimension you just mentioned about poverty, or should we be expecting them to come in and pick up the pieces when it all falls apart?
Well, I've actually had the privilege of meeting and conversing with Justin Welby, who is now we should call him Archbishop of Canterbury. But and I'll tell you where, because not only was he the treasurer of a quite troubled, shall we say, French oil company, but after he was that, and after he became a priest, he was, and I have observed this, a tireless and selfless communicator in some of the most troubled parts of the world in trying to build inter-community dialogue. So inter-community dialogue in a place like the Plateau States of Nigeria means trying to stop people killing each other. And Justin's done that. So when I follow him, I'm not just following him out of any kind of deference, because believe me, I do not follow I do follow the Pope, but that's not out of deference. I did that for a laugh, really. But Justin's an interesting guy because he's lived in the real world and done real things. And I think, you know, as you're presumably from the C of E yourself, there's a very interesting thing happening, isn't there? There's a huge, you know, who thought the Catholics owned social teaching? Turns out the C of E is probably one of the most radical, socially radical in parts institutions. So I think, yeah, I think yes, there is a role for that. And of course, what everybody's been craving is morality and finance, isn't there? So Stephen Green, who was the boss of HSBC, chair of HSBC, not the chief exec, also an ordained minister of the C of E, came out with this big sort of think piece book about how the teachings of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin should be applied to global capitalism. But if he'd have spent less time on writing the book and more time in working out that they were about to get $1 billion fine for effectively facilitating the money laundering of criminals, maybe the shareholders would have thanked him a bit more.